Okay, ready?
Yeah.
So we're going this summer.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Grolier. Thank you for supporting the shop as we celebrate our 98th year, believe it or not. Thank you. Tonight we have a great reading featuring Christopher Bakken, and Jonathan Aaron, who will read in that order. To provide the introductions, please welcome longtime friend of the Grolier, George Kalogeris.
Well, thank you, James, for all that you do and for being the reason this is still going into its 98th year. Can you hear me okay in the back, Charles? Okay. One important link between these two poets you'll soon be hearing from is that they were both close friends and great admirers of Adam Zagajewski, that Polish poet par excellence of the understated sublime. Christopher Bakken studied with him at the University of Houston. They often met up in Greece, where Zagajewski loved to swim, and Bakken served as director of writing workshops in Thessaloniki and Thasos. And both of tonight's poets wrote beautiful elegies to their friend, and both of them quoted Zagajewski's exquisitely paradoxical phrase, doubt and rapture, that equipollent potency, that the mark of a poet intensely drawn to the light, yet profoundly aware of the darkness, rapture and doubt. It's a lyric note that still rings true since the time of Sappho and hangs in the air of this hallowed poetry bookshop, and you'll hear it again this evening. I'll introduce Christopher first. In his superb poem, Turning 50 at the Oracle of Delphi, Christopher Bakken's poem fuses two sources of his prolific imagination: the landscape of Greece, in this case the coast of the Mani, and the heartland of his native Madison, Wisconsin. Listen to these lines go down into the underworld and come up again in childhood. It starts with a quote from the Roman writer Apuleius. When you come to the oracle of death, push your head through, find a road going down that no one travels. That same road led into a labyrinth of storm drains I discovered when I was 10 beneath the streets of Madison, Wisconsin. See if I can start that again and get this to stay up. You got that, James?
Is that a good thing?
Yep. Great, thanks. I'll start it from the beginning. It starts with a quote from the Roman writer Apuleius. When you come to the oracle of death, push your head through, find a road going down that no one travels. That same road led into a labyrinth of storm drains I discovered when I was 10 beneath the streets of Madison, Wisconsin. Those crumbling tunnels were ankle deep with rainwater and rills of fallen leaves. I lost myself down there, and yet emerged from a manhole 5 blocks from home. I'd followed where the sunlit current led. 50 now, why not get lost again? End quote. When you come to the oracle of death, push your head through, find a road going down that no one travels, the Romans said. Christopher Bakken's poems do just that. They push through by keeping their head down down to the line, and like a mole that follows it blind, blind to the following line. And having such faith in the dark, circuitous roots and unlit undercurrents of poetry, they opened the way to sunlit surprise. Look how down they go down into the manholes of the underworld and come back up in the storm drains of wide-eyed childhood. And why not get lost again? But sometimes the road less traveled by resurfaces in hell. The hell that for some is here, as Marlowe once said. In his brilliant homage to Robert Lowell's For the Union Dead, it's Bakken's elegy for a lost America that strikes so painfully and dreadfully close to home. Quote, some years back, I read a student essay that not once but twice referred to Lowell's For the Dead Union. By mistake, a bit too apt, and only months after Charlottesville. I'm proud to have him as a fellow poet at LSU Press, Christopher Bakken.
I like this little dance we get to do before I come up.
I'm going to set this timer so I don't go over time, or I'll try not to. It is such a joy to be here at the Grolier. I used to work for a magazine called Parnassus Poetry and Review. I was a peon, which meant my job was to stuff envelopes. And I remember every time we publish a new issue, I'm sending them to the Grolier bookstore, the famous one. And it's the first time I've ever been here. So destiny, at last, is here. And so thankful to James for keeping this place going, for George for that lovely introduction, to my fellow reader Jonathan, and to so many friends from far and wide who are surprised me by you being here. It's just glorious. Here's the opening poem of this new book. I think all books should begin with a ritual sacrifice, and that's where we start here. On one of the island of Thasos, my buddy said, come with me, we're going to the mountain. It's called Driving the Beast. You hear me all right? In the thick brush, they spend the hottest part of the day, soaking their hooves in the trickle of mountain water the ravine hoards on behalf of the oleander. You slung your gun across your back in order to heave a huge gray stone over the edge, so it rolled, then leaped and crashed below. This is what it took to break the shade, to drive the beast. Not to mention a thrumming of wings into the sky, a wild confetti of frantic grouse. But we had slugs not shot, and we're after their small meat, but the huge rams, whose rack you'd seen last spring, and whose stench now parted air. That scat-caked, rut-ripe perfume of beast. Watch, now, he runs, you said, launching another boulder. Then out it sprang through a gap in some pine, brown and black with spiraled horns, impossibly agile for its size. But yes, he fell with one shot. Already an idea of meat for fire by the time we'd scrambled through the scree. And that was all. No, you were careful, even tender with the knife work, slitting the body wide with one stroke, then with your hands lifting entire the miraculous liver and heart, emptying the beast on the mountain. Later, it rained, knocking dust off the patio stones. Small frogs returned from abroad to sing in the stream beds. We sat and drank. At last you spoke. No more, you said. Enough with mourning. Then rose to turn our guts, already searing on the fire. That is the only poem of mine ever to be was published with the Academy of American Poets to be refeatured by a hunting magazine. I don't want to read two poems about hunting tonight, just to prove that I should be in there. This book, as George said beautifully, travels between Greece, my adopted home country, I'm not Greek, and Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up. And this shift back and forth informs a lot of the poems, and many I'll read tonight. The book's also held together by a series of poems that have the word theology in the title. These are unorthodox Gnostic theologies, attempts to imagine what the sacred might look like for a specific animal or in a specific place. If the goat has a theology, it's Whitmanian, for sure. Goats have a bad reputation. They deserve it, as you'll hear from this poem. This is goat theology. Those who deny everything, yet want, hear me. Always higher, out of sight, are sweeter leaves, and a steep plot of clover only I know. Let there be nothing unwelcome to the tongue. Unbind the tongue from its word and swallow. To chew without ceasing, even musk thistle and thorn, remembering the mountain's capricious grass, gnawing the root and rind. To mount a tree's voluptuous bark, and smear it with beard, and mark it with funk, then ravage a whole hillside downs to its best ideas. Not only asphodel and sedge, but rubbish and rot, the rank ends and inedible beginnings. Lord Azazel, goad open every throat, I cast myself out beyond the last fence, here at the end of all refusal. I come from a long line of deer killers in the state of Wisconsin. It's a badge of pride to go out in the woods and shoot at these beautiful animals, and I'm an utter disgrace to my entire family in this regard, having never shot a deer. And as you'll hear from this poem, why my hunting methods were never successful. The poem's called Whitetail Theology. Maybe it will help to know that my father, the poem's about my father, was what we would now probably call an opioid addict. He got addicted to prescription drugs early, and it sort of haunted him and our relationship his entire life. And yet this poem is very much in love for him. Whitetail Theology. In late October, early in the rut, I'd heave up to the higher branches and wedge myself between two wings of oak, then grip my bow, try hard to stay still. Nothing made that easy. Neither the cold nor the stampede of raw desires that threatened to trample my boredom. What made it worse were the ghosts who'd hunted here before, the family line, generations who stalked these woods, its granite pinnacle, looking for deer. How little I cared about shooting them. Well before dusk, my father would leave to stomp a 3-mile arc behind the wind, forgetting his damaged hip. And for now, even the brown bottles of pills he racked like ammunition in the black lunch pail he hid beneath a blanket in his car. Instead, he'd steer the deer from their grass along the muddy banks of Blue Mounds Creek to run them up through scrub to where I sat. The shame he carried, I could not forgive. And yet, after those hard hours of hiking, when he'd find doe or even a spiked buck pulling clover right under my tree, and I wasn't asleep but reading a book, he'd say nothing. We were not eloquent like that, not with our disappointments. The deer would raise tail and run. We'd drive home. As the Greek myths go, there are few good fathers. Sons are abandoned on barren hillsides, left to starve. Others are simply devoured, gore for the monsters who engendered them. And Zeus, a flagrant serial sadist. At best, men are titans for a few hours. Small gods who stride beside the ancestors to lift us while they can, from chariots into bed, setting all our weapons aside. And though he must have held him in his arms, that boy who lost his wings, the boy who fell, not even poor Daedalus could save his son. No wonder I could not save my father. Imagine that you came from a village called Word of God. Imagine the pressure you would feel. That's the actual name of an inland village in the island of Thasos. It's called Theologos. And this poem is about a forest fire that started on the outskirts of Theologos and spread across the southwestern part of the island that I love. Theologos. Somewhere the bush is torched, and brittle pines cast shrapnel into the needled blanket 10 seasons had woven down Livadi, across ridges, all the way to Thimonia. 1 hour to melt the water lines a generation of men believed could quench the valley's thirst. The word raced towards Estritha, consuming groves, stables, and nests, turning ground doves into torches, sparing only the archangel on the cliff. The oldest trees unring themselves to ash, were hollowed into towers lit with eyes. Rabbits, too, heard the word, then dashed into their dying, bearing light to riverbeds where more dusty tinder waited to speak. Lives not smaller than ours, but greater. To speed, headlong, blow embers and stoke, then smolder by the furthest village walls into cathedrals of snowy fur and bone. The rest, the word forgot, allowed to burn. Is that enough theology? Let's celebrate my birthday. My half-century birthday was now quite a long time ago, but I did turn 50 once. It seems like a while back. One doesn't do happy things anymore when you're my age. You go to the Oracle of Death for fun. This is a real place down in the Mani Peninsula, and I followed 2 texts, one of which you mentioned is Apuleius' The Golden Ass, which actually has directions for how to get there and what to do when you get there. And the other is the great British travel writer Patrick Leigh Fermor, whose book Mani is one of the masterpieces of 20th century prose. And he describes going there, finding the entrance to Hades, and I said, well, it's my birthday, let's go. And so this is, you might not be surprised to hear that this is 10 stanzas, 5 lines each. I like mathematics, not very much. And that's not math, that's arithmetic, right? Yeah, we know that. Turning 50 at the Oracle of Death. A few wrong turns brought me here to the end. So far south, the land ran out of itself. Open sea devouring all but this slab of dusty headland inscribed by high wind. I obeyed the ancient instructions, left my rented car behind, and went by foot to find the cave, the drawing place of ghosts, ventilation shaft of the underworld. Here the living came to sip at death. Would I even know which questions to ask? Half a century old, and I was still a ruin addict, clomping haunted sites in my flip-flops, hoping to rouse the mind with a whiff of information and myth in between long swims and cold seaside beers. I'd never like to predict my next move. Yet for this cheerful destination, I'd read a book, even opened a map. In fact, prediction was what drew me here. Looking out for death, listening at least for its mute, insistent murmur, was what I had been doing every day since, as a boy, I learned I had to die. When you come to the Oracle of Death, push your head through, find a road going down that no one travels. That same road led into a labyrinth of storm drains, I discovered when I was 10 beneath the streets of Madison, Wisconsin. Those crumbling tunnels were ankle deep with rainwater and rills of fallen leaves. I lost myself down there, yet emerged from a manhole 5 blocks from home. I'd followed where the unlit current led. 50 now? Why not get lost again? I trudged the sweltering peninsula, but found only old walls, a broken church. The famous cave, I learned, was further out. You had to go by boat and then dive in. So many years spent tunneling back into passages I wouldn't remember. Every hour sacred, but rigged for collapse. Burial rites we rehearse each birthday. Which is to say there's really no way back, and this far south, left and right are the same. Anyway, the afternoon was dying. The map of the Mani I'd unfolded was still there in my car to be ignored. The end of one continent at my feet. Nothing to do now but turn north and walk. Where shall I go for my 60th? I think I've got time to read 3 more. These would be shorter. The great Greek poet Cavafy invented a form of poem called the Days of poem. Days of, John Lee, you wrote one of these, I think, once upon a time in my class, probably. He would pick a year and offer a single memory or instance that for him was representative of that entire moment. And so you're about to learn about 1993. I just moved to Greece. I'm in my 20s. I have no idea what I'm doing. He'd leave the village to its dust, hike a shepherd trail over the ridge, and pitch his tent in a hidden inlet where no one would see his driftwood fire. Every day he'd follow unmarked roads along the coast, perfectly alone, swimming and sobbing, splayed with the lizards on those temples of marl. Sometimes he'd push on for an hour, then stop to write the same line over again in the blank book he cuffed inside his pack. Always thirst, always wild sage, and as many sea urchins as gods. Juniper, ravaged by the awful sun. There was someone he might have loved in Vuvuru, further up the coast. And always Cavafy, calling from Egypt, it was over soon, that wonderful life. Like that, he began, waterless, wind-wrenched, cleaving to rock. And this is Days of 2015. You've heard of Carpe Diem? In Greece, they practice Carpe Noctem, which is the other version. There's an epigraph here, famous song called Min kles vasuturia bellu, ta Kalogeris mikra ke telioti himones, our brief summers and endless winters. This wonderful song. Days of 2015. We seized the night and shook it till it broke. So time and bottles and most of our shoes spilled from its breaking, and music gushed too. Paris and Nikos, relentless until 5. Blame them for this minefield of broken glass, our unreasonable outbursts of joy. Someone danced until his knees were bleeding. Someone said she had fractured her being. Then that night ended. Then sun, as before. Now the instruments unwind in their coffins, and we pace along the balcony and stare. The broken girl is asleep in last night's chair. Some say we have tonight, tomorrow too. In the fireplace, a few embers glow. Brother, bring me some coffee. Okay, and beer. We're going to need at least 1,000 years. It's terrible advice that poem gives you, but one should follow it. Let me end with a poem about swimming and about our shared friend Adam Zagievsky. Adam would write me every year before he went to Greece and say, all right, where are we swimming this year?
Yeah.
And he would want to know the most obscure, unpopulated beach where he could just get in the water and do this for hours while his wife Maya watched nervously from the shore. Yeah, you know. The poem incorporates quotations from the last letter I received from Adam. I had announced to him the birth of my son. He responded with a picture of his cat. So you'll hear a little bit of Adam in this poem. The poem is set at a place called Yerisos near the Halkidiki Peninsula. And I'm doing the unwise thing of swimming in January. January swim. First dive of the year. Lured into the cove by the old stone dragons of Yerisos, who have, by January, converted the water to flame. Thinking of my friend Adam, who would float for hours at Horosvakion on Crete, or other summers at the placid edge of Kos or Kardamili. He once wrote from Prevoli, impressed by the wild muscular orthodoxy conveyed by the statue of a monk with a machine gun. He sometimes settled for Sardinia, though he would have loved Yerisos had he not died last April in Krakow. He last wrote at Easter, said he was busy scribbling poems and shaping something on Brodsky, that my new son had arrived with a message. The future exists, don't worry. He loved Linden's and Gregorian chant, in small doses taken like a potion. He was a poet of doubt and rapture, always moored to earth by books, black cats, and the sight of his beloved wife's face. Swimming, too. And Seferis' great poem, The King of Assini, inspired by a Homeric footnote. At Yerisos, my wife and son are pacing the sand. We have a long drive to reach the future. I am shivering and very tired of death. Just sadness, that's all. Like Seferis in 1945, wrung out by war and distrustful of words, but suddenly moved when a blind man in Athens made his way past the bullet-riddled walls and stepped right into the fire, playing Greek anthems on his harmonica. Adam was born that same year in Lvov, to a Europe of shabby anthems, sublime blindness, with all the wounds Seferis promise, also the sea. Thanks so much.
It's a great honor to be introducing my very dear friend, Jonathan Aaron. He's a poet of both immense discretion and wildly expansive imagination. And he's very funny. Funny in the way that we say funny when something rings the chimes of the uncanny. In the way that his poem, The Obvious, winds up by telling us what's so plainly obvious. The obvious is incomprehensible. Here's the blurb I wrote for his book of new and selected poems, Just About Anything. What's it like coming back to life and discovering you're fluent in a dead language? The narrator wonders, in this book, so brilliantly alive to what it's saying, that just like that, we're ready for just about anything. Imagine poems as uncanny as they are disenchanted, capable of great metaphysical and historical reach, yet never raising their voice or venturing too far from the plainest words in the language. And hardly a single line that isn't in the service of exacting finer gradations of feeling. These are just some of the 4 decades worth of lyric felicities registered in Jonathan Aaron's work. what Adam Zagajewski described as poetry that mediates the stringent necessities of the shabby and the sublime, fits his temperament to a T. End quote. Jonathan Aaron's work has been praised by Joseph Brodsky, Anthony Hecht, Mark Strand, David Ferry, and Charles Simic. In the TLS Best Books of the Year for 2025, the one and only poetry volume singled out by the eminently provocative and super incisive critic Michael Hoffman was Jonathan Aaron's. He called it, quote, a book full of coffee and rain and colloquial persistence. Jonathan Aaron.
Take four.
Right. How's this? Can you hear me okay? Maybe a little lower, just a little. Yeah, okay. George, thank you very much. It's I don't know, your words take my breath away. I mean, and Christopher, wonderful. I'm so happy to be here with you. And thank you very much for being here, everyone.
Please speak into the microphone?
Yes, right. This is my problem. Yeah. Is this okay? No. Nope.
Closer.
Nope. Okay.
How's that?
Huh.
Yeah.
Bravo.
All right. Okay, I'll try to stand at attention as I do my job here. But thank you again. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, James. This is a great place to be, and as you all know, it's a great privilege to be here with you. Thank you. Let's see. Now, what I have to do is put on the right glasses. That way, I hope I make fewer faux pas. From the book, there's a poem on page 85. It's okay. It's called Elsewhere. It's for Stanisław Baranczak, who was a wonderful, he taught here at Harvard, was a wonderful person and a wonderful poet and a beloved teacher. It's called Elsewhere. It's almost noon. You put down your book and look around. The cat stirs in its sleep on the windowsill. Fishermen are passing below on their noisy, brightly colored boats. One of the two women at a nearby table laughs. A peach glows on the plate next to your glass. And in spite of the hour, the sound of a trumpet playing Stardust waveringly makes it all the way over from the other side of the harbor. And this is called tisane, which is as you know, a mixture of herbal teas, and it's from the Greek tisan, or you can pronounce it for me, which means to crush in Greek. So it's crushed verbs. The bag puffs up in the cup, as boiling water drills from the kettle's spout into a sudden somersaulting of almost invisible dogs chasing their tails, coiling the pent-up herbs into a dizzy confusion and infusion of blurs, a steamy mill race. Waiting for the right moment to suspend the chemistry, I seem to be looking down from the greater and greater height, like a balloonist embarked on one of those self-indulgent, highly publicized attempts that always seem to end in a welter of news reports whose only point in common is the inhospitable desert of southern Algeria. And this is the title poem of the book, The Obvious. Red geraniums waving at a season passing in seconds. A yellow leaf I pick up here and lay down there. We either think with the blood or the air or the fire inside us, with a, quote, lonesome glee, quote, said Emily Dickinson. I take my pulse, wondering what's the good in the world coming apart at the seams. How can you put the pieces together when nothing's left to begin with? From a standpoint of pure reason, the obvious is incomprehensible. So it's hard to know whether meaning anything has to do with meaning anymore. Lao Tzu, a good traveler has no interest in arriving. Or the gentle refugee, you can take your umbrella or you can leave your umbrella. Or Joseph Cornell, quote, violet-banked approaches, musical waterfalls, easy walking distance to enchanted lake, reasonable rates. Every memory has a mind of its own. If it never happened, it's not as if it didn't. Okay. These are some poems, recent poems, I should say. Again, can you hear me all right? Is this good? Okay. Yep.
Into the mic.
Okay. The nature of things. One, there are 3 parts. When you're watching a movie and suddenly hear a chorus of violins sounding like hysterical mice, and a door at the end of an unlit hall slowly opens to reveal the silhouette of someone standing alone in its cold, anonymous glow, you can resort to telling yourself this ear-stabbing racket was composed with the sole aim of making you feel at this very moment the way you feel right now. When you're wandering around in an art gallery and come across a painting featuring a broad black swatch that looks slapped on as if with a house painter's brush, you can pretty much assume that whoever did it might not have known what they were doing, but in any case, couldn't have given a rat's ass whether or not you'd be bored or intrigued by the result. And that's the point. Or then again, maybe it isn't. 3, when the words in your head can't agree on how to say whatever it is you're trying to get them to say, and you realize you don't know who's talking whose language, just remember Plato said racking your brain like this is bad for the soul, keeping in mind you can always consult a therapist, though it actually might be simpler to chalk it all up to what your grandmother, wagging a finger, said was typical of the nature of things. Let's see. how much time, how am I doing?
You're doing great.
It's called Forgettings. Venomous snakes have their own special ways of doing things. Your timber rattler, your boom slang, your banded crate, they know what they know, which is more than we can say for ourselves, wandering around some Wyoming pasture, admiring the sky, or showing our compassion by photographing rhinos in a Zambian game preserve. Any landscape brims with its own ideas. As for all those uncanny slitherers, ranging worldwide from 2 to nearly 20 feet in length, all wrapped up in catching rats and birds, sometimes even ill-starred members of their own kind, they're not interested in us. Only when we forget and step too close does the situation darken. Let's see how I got here. Some of you may know of the Russian folklore of the witch Baba Yaga, who flies around in a big pestle, or no, in a big mortar, and steering by the pestle, and she flies through the air looking for naughty children, and so this is, my brothers and I heard this first when we were kids, and it scared the hell out of us. But Baba Yaga is a variation on a Russian folktale. At night, she glides over farms and villages in her iron kettle, all ears for the voice of any child refusing to go to bed. If you keep saying no, the hag will hear you, parents warn. Now she's hovering above some peasant's roof, squeals of disobedience whetting her appetite. In a moment, she'll plummet to seize the latest little one who wouldn't listen. Yet eating children isn't all she thinks about. One day in a forest, entranced by birdsong, you just might chance upon a clearing, a hut at the edge of it, and in the doorway, an old woman smiling at you through a swarm of flies. This is another sort of childhood. This comes out of the memory of childhood, but it's called Snapping Turtle. Calidra serpentina, I think is the the name in Latin. You know what snapping turtles look like. They're big and they heavy, the carapace, and the head got a big beak on it, and so you don't want to mess with them. Snapping turtle. She stretches her neck and looks around, then resumes shoving her rear end into the dirt she's clawed to a porous softness. Next to the tool shed, not a very good place for laying your eggs, I hear myself think. I hope you know what you're doing. She backs and fills with clumsy concentration. Hard work, I imagine, like using a dinner plate to dig in a flower bed. The rain lets up. Sheets of mist shred the spruce and white pine on the other side of the field. She adds a few finishing touches, then with a slow paddling motion, starts moving through the wet grass, leaving a faint wake like the track of someone's hand on the pile of a rug. And not wanting to, I see again the heavy, carapaced creature immobilized in the middle of a dirt road near the ocean. My friends and I hacking at her with garden tools and a medieval-looking implement resembling a halberd. 12-year-olds excitedly intent on purifying the world, her blood as thick and dark as motor oil. She pauses now and lifts her head with that face of a hawk crossed with a toad. Is it because she senses the two dogs who've just broken from the trees at the field's far edge, followed by a woman mostly hidden under a black umbrella? If they get too near, I'll yell at them to keep their distance. And if they don't, I'll pick you up and carry you into the woods toward the pond you must have come from, my hands just beyond the reach of your backward snapping jaws, my skin crawling with admiration and shame.
Wow.
How's the time? Got time for one more?
Couple more.
Two more?
Read it.
Oh. Oops. Pardon me. This one is called Looking for Isaac Babel, or Isaac Babel. If I can ever find it here. How adept I am. Okay, Isaac Babel, you know, of course, he was a Russian writer, born in 1894 and died in 1940, just a wonderful, wonderful man. This is called Looking for Isaac Babel, and I have a lot of books, and of course, as many of us do, you walk around looking at a bookcase and say, oh, that looks interesting, and then you put it down and forget about it. So this is sort of comes out of that kind of experience. The Looking for Isaac Babel. The article I'm reading tells me Ivan Turgenev served a month in jail, plus nearly 2 years house arrest for the treasonable act, quotes, of writing an admiring obituary of Nikolai Gogol. Do I still have my copy of Dead Souls? I checked the hallway bookcase, and there it is, that little paperback sandwiched between Crime and Punishment and Anna Karenina. I see Chekhov, Lermontov, Mayakovsky. Pushkin hasn't moved an inch, but where's Isaac Babel, who, just after the revolution, aged 23, worked briefly at the People's Commissariat for Enlightenment, who rode with Cossacks in the Polish-Soviet War, then wrote The Dangerous Stories in Red Cavalry, a book that made his name, who by the late 20s had become Russia's most famous writer, quotation, journalism, short fiction, screenplays, who during the ill-lit 30s returned how many times from the safety of Paris to Moscow's ever darker possibilities. In May 39, arrested, accused of Trotskyism, terrorism, spying for France and Austria. After a final, quote, interrogation in late January 1940, condemned to death and next morning shot by a firing squad in a basement of the Lubyanka. He's got to be around here somewhere. Another Russian. Okay, this is the last. This is the last one I'll read, I think. It's called A Kind of Knowing. And I'm, as George said, I'm thinking about Adam Zagajewski, who was a friend of mine and of Christopher's, and whose death was a terrible, terrible loss. But the epigraph here is from Adam, one of his poems. My friends advise me to stop grieving. And our poems, they have something in common, all right. You wondered if Schubert might have thought there's no merry music. Without raising your voice, believed in the justice of Pascal's wager. We're ever open to anything impossible to put into words. This morning, I found myself thinking about how many poems in your last book are about death, even though, as you once said, all poems are in one way or another about death. And thinking too of your love of cats and your need to walk for hours in your favorite cities, looking for something you didn't know you were looking for. That in August, when the sea gave you the chance, you'd swim far from shore and lose track of time, studying the sky. There were bad days, ennui, vacancy, but you knew a kind of knowing past knowing would come back to you with new doubts, new raptures, new ways to praise what goes on, measureless, damaged, without end. And do I have time for one more? Is that too much? Okay. Okay, I'll try not to rush this, but recalling the Huns. We knew they were coming, the people who lived on the shores of the frozen ocean, a race, according to ancient records, savage beyond parallel. Word reached us they'd crossed the Volga, driving the Alani before them, whom our government then allowed to settle in great numbers in the northern district, where, in poverty and exhaustion, they wondered what they were guilty of that deserved such punishment. Refugees began arriving with starker reports. At birth, the cheeks of the Huns are scarred by an iron, causing hairlessness, which they take as a sign of beauty. The Huns have no need of fire or shelter and disdain well-flavored food, preferring to feed on herbs and tubers such as they find in the plains or on the half-raw flesh of any animal, which they warm against the backs of their horses as they journey forward. And no longer from hearsay, but from first-hand accounts, we learned of their fondness for surprising their enemies, their willfulness in negotiation, their contempt for the gods, their unbridled love of gold. And we knew we lay directly in the path of their advance. What could we do given the speed and force of their onset, their tirelessness in pursuit? How could we expect mercy if not one among them could tell where he was born, having been conceived and raised as if on the waves of a torrent, carried along in a storm over unheard of distances? Then came the morning I saw 12 of them on the eastern edge of this very field, clearly outlined against the arrival of fair weather. They seemed to have risen up out of the earth, small on their stocky mounts, smaller than I could have imagined, some carrying lances, some those terrible bows. A little wind stirring the feathers of their helmets. I knew they'd seen me. How could they not have? They made no sound as they drew together to confer and study the four directions, looking grouped in silhouette, like one of those many-legged, many-minded creatures we remember from the tales of our ancestors. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Jonathan. Let's give them a round of applause for wonderful reading. Thank you so much. Thank you to George for the wonderful introduction. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you. Thanks to everyone on Zoom. We have some books for sale. Poets will be signing books. And if everyone would please put their chairs up against one of the walls, I'd be very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Poetry.